there is an image that surprises many. Henry VIII, the king who once symbolized power and strength, in the final years of his life, was no longer the young man full of vitality. He had become obese, plagued by illness, and his legs were so painful that he could barely move. Yet despite his condition, Henry still decided to lead an army across the sea to conquer France. A king who seemed destined to rest in his palace donned armor and went to war. And the Boulogne campaign of 1544 became the final chapter in his life, full of ambition and contradictions. What drove Henry VIII in his old age to risk both his health and the national treasury in such a luxurious war? Was it merely the desire for one last moment of glory, or the obsession with leaving an indelible mark before his death? This question continues to fuel debates among historians to this day. Today, we will explore a campaign that is rarely mentioned, but reveals a clear picture of Henry VIII in his final years. This is not only a story about a port city named Boulogne, but also a story about pride, the thirst for power, and the price to pay. When a king places his personal reputation above the prosperity of his nation, was this victory truly worth it? Or just a vanity project to satisfy Henry VIII's ego? The answer lies within the tumultuous journey of Boulogne, 1544. In 1544, Europe was a complex political chessboard where alliances and agreements could change overnight. Henry VIII, who had ruled for nearly 4 decades, did not want to be seen as an aging king, slowly fading into the shadows. He yearned to prove that England still had the strength to stand alongside the great powers of the continent. It was also the time he allied with Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, to open a front against France, their longtime enemy in Henry's eyes. This was not merely a war, but an opportunity to engrave his name into European history. However, ever behind the political maneuvers lay an England burdened by heavy taxes, the treasury already drained by extravagant projects in previous wars now had to finance a large-scale military campaign. The people complained and the nobles hesitated, but Henry remained steadfast. He believed that glory would overshadow all sacrifices, and that victory would justify all the hopes placed on the venture. In this context, Boulogne, a strategic port city of France, became the primary target. If he could capture Boulogne, Henry would not only control an important gateway to the English Channel, but also prove that even age and illness could not stop him from achieving military success. And from these calculations, an ambitious campaign began, promising both glory and tragedy. In the summer of 1544, the English army crossed the Channel into France, carrying with them both confidence and the heavy expectations of Henry VIII. Their destination was Boulogne, a fortified port city located on the shores of the Channel, considered the key to controlling the trade and military route between the two coasts. As the English arrived, a sense of urgency enveloped the city. The French people and the defenders knew they had become the primary target of a king's final ambition. The siege began in July. The English built fortifications, dug trenches, and deployed heavy artillery. Cannons roared day and night, aiming directly at the walls of Boulogne, while English soldiers continued to tighten the noose. The French tried to resist, but against the persistence and overwhelming power of the enemy, each wall and defense line gradually collapsed. Fear spread throughout the city as supplies ran low, and the morale of the soldiers deteriorated. By September, after weeks of resistance, Boulogne was forced to surrender. The English flag flew over the city, and Henry VIII, despite his failing health, was present to witness the moment of victory. But as he basked in glory, a bitter truth awaited him. His ally Charles V, instead of continuing to stand by him, suddenly signed a separate peace treaty with France, leaving England to stand alone. Thus the victory at Boulogne was both glorious and tinged with isolation, signaling the heavy price that would be paid in the years to come. Henry VIII's appearance at Boulogne was far from the familiar image of a young king who once dominated the battlefield. By this time he was old, overweight, plagued by illness, and his legs were so painful that he could barely move. Yet his eyes still sparkled with the determination of a warrior. It was this very presence that made the entire army feel they were fighting for the honor of a king who refused to bow to age or adversity. For Henry, the Boulogne campaign was his final opportunity to prove to the world that he was still the king of steel and blood, not an old man on the verge of collapse. At the moment Boulogne fell, Henry VIII achieved the victory he had longed for. He saw the English flag flying over the port city, and in his mind, this was the eternal mark of the Tudor dynasty. Under his rule, but at the same time, the contradictions within him were evident. Henry wanted glory for himself, but he also knew that the price was an empty treasury and a people burdened with taxes. He chose to accept this because for Henry, nothing was more important than his everlasting reputation. Thus, the Boulogne campaign perfectly illustrated Henry VIII in the final years of his life, proud, stubborn, willing to challenge his own limits, yet deeply conflicted as his ego overshadowed the national interest. This was both his strength and his weakness, the dual nature of one of England's most famous kings. The Boulogne campaign granted Henry VIII a brief moment of glory, but history has shown that this victory was not a complete one. The important port city fell into English hands, but it resembled more of a vain trophy than a foundation for long-term prosperity. Less than 6 years later, Boulogne was returned to France in exchange for a ransom. All that remained was the memory of the final triumph of a king who placed his ego above the nation's welfare. For England, Boulogne was not the beginning of expansion, but a testament to the heavy cost of ambition. The treasury, already drained, became further depleted, the people burdened with heavy taxes, while the only pride they received was a temporary city under the English flag This campaign showed that victory on the battlefield does not always translate into victory. In history, what matters is not how much land is gained, but whether a nation can maintain stability and sustainability. Boulogne thus serves as a profound lesson for all eras. A leader can use power to win victories, but if the long-term future of the nation is neglected, those victories will eventually fade away. Henry VIII etched his name in history with Boulogne, but also left behind a question without an answer. Was the brief glory worth the price that the entire country had to pay? The Boulogne campaign of 1544 ended as the clearest mirror of Henry VIII. In his later years, he gained a victory. But that victory was as fragile as an illusion. It satisfied the pride of a king eager to leave a mark, but it left the country in ruin. Boulogne did not become a symbol of territorial expansion, but a proof of an ambition that was both grand and blind. And it was there that we saw the contradiction within. Henry, a warrior who refused to succumb to old age, but also a king whose ego overshadowed the common good. For history, Boulogne is not just a city that was captured and then returned, but a story about the true value of victory. A victory can bring fame to an individual, but if it burdens the nation, can it truly be considered a victory? Henry VIII chose his path, and he carved his name into history, with both glory and mistakes. This is the complexity that makes his image both admired and controversial. The final question we must ask ourselves is, if you were in Henry VIII's shoes, would you be willing to sacrifice the stability of the nation for a victory bearing your name? Leave your thoughts below, as different viewpoints will make history come to life. And if you want to continue exploring that few know, join us at the Cryptic History, where many mysteries are waiting to be uncovered.